Unless you've been hiding under a rock for the last 10 years, you know that this guy was one of the biggest stars in the UFC. It's 2026 now, and he hasn't fought in over 5 years. And in MMA, that's become weirdly normal. People lose even once to the GOATs, and they just vanish from existence. And that's the part that just makes you ask, what in the happened to the UFC? But to understand the contrast between now and then, we have to date back all the way to November 12, 1993, where UFC held its first event. At the time, it was completely unstructured. No time limits, no weight classes, unstructured gloves. It was basically a fist fight. And although it was extremely dangerous, that raw brutality is what separated the UFC from other combat sports in the first place. But like life, that short-lasting era died because in 1997, the Athletic States Commission introduced weight classes starting with lightweight and heavyweight. Then in 1999, the New Jersey State Athletic Control Board helped formalize MMA regulation, shaping the unified rule set the sport still uses today. But the pivotal shift happened in 2012 when the UFC introduced female divisions, eventually producing stars like Ronda Rousey and Amanda Nunes. But to many fans, the subjective stance is that the era 2012 to 2019 was the pinnacle of the sport. I don't know, but they might be right. The 2010s marked a turning point for the UFC and MMA as a whole. This was the era defined by dominance. Fighters like Jon Jones establishing early control of the sport, and later, stars like Conor McGregor redefining what it meant to be a UFC superstar. Although this era was very, and I mean very memorable, some things noticeably shifted. Because it wasn't about winning fights anymore. Skills no longer paid the bills, selling did. And Conor McGregor was a perfect example of that. In fact, according to many reliable sources, several of the highest selling pay-per-views in UFC history featured him in the center of the main event. And I think it's safe to say the pinnacle of his career was in November 2016 when he added lightweight champion to one of his many accolades. But after a 2-year layoff, for absolutely no reason by the way, the UFC decided to continue without him, proving that they're not dependent on any one fighter, no matter how big they became. After the peak of the McGregor era, the UFC decided to enter a new phase. Champions were no longer always active, and divisions started to slow down. There were some fighters out there, Jon Jones, that held titles for years and defended it only a few times. Then came one of the most disruptive moments in UFC history. Events were moved behind closed doors, schedules were disrupted, and the entire sport had to adapt in real time. In the modern era of the UFC, one thing became clear. The landscape has completely changed again. And then came a new wave of contenders. Fighters like Khamzat Chimaev brought hype, pressure and dominance in their careers, while a new generation began to emerge, built for both skill and spotlight. One of the clearest examples of this is Ilia Topuria. He rose quickly through the featherweight division, defeating elite competition, including former champions and contenders. But even moments like this feel different compared to the past. Less about global superstardom and more about rapid competition at the highest level. And that's what makes modern UFC so strange. On paper, the organization has never been bigger. More viewers, more global stars, more events, and more money than ever before. But somewhere along the way, it feels like the UFC has started losing the very thing that made people fall in love with it in the first place. Maybe it's because the rivalries don't hit the same anymore. We went from rivalries such as Jon Jones vs Daniel Cormier to an era where fighters come and go before those stories can truly develop. And maybe that's why the rivalry between Adesanya and Pereira felt so special. Looking back, it might have been one of the last rivalries that truly captured that classic UFC feeling. So has the UFC fallen off? Probably not. It's bigger than it's ever been. But bigger doesn't always mean better. And for a lot of fans, that's exactly what happened to the UFC.